So there's this ongoing problem that I see, and I know that it's not something that exists strictly in the United States or frankly in any country anywhere in the world, and I don't think it's something that's started happening in the recent past, though I think there's probably a lot more reason to assume that it's something that occurs more now than it has in past. There are a number of reasons that I can make that statement. And I'm going to talk about that today. The subject that I'm going to talk about is, I've titled An Abundance of Laws. And that's what we're going to talk about today on the Daily Summation for Kurt's Religion and Politics. Hello, I'm your host. I'm Kurt. Today is Thursday, the 11th of March of 2021. Welcome to everybody who's coming aboard on Rumble, on the podcast, on YouTube, wherever you happen to be visiting me from. Welcome aboard. And it's nice to have you. So I am going to be bluntly honest. I don't have this is not perfectly true. I have some idea, but I don't have a huge amount of idea what needs to be done about the fact that we have a ton of laws on the books. So there are two things that happen. I want to point this out. I don't know about other countries so much, but I know about the United States, and let me tell you what I know about the United States. There is a tendency in the United States to have two things happen. Number one, we have legislative bodies at various levels, the federal legislative bodies, state legislative bodies, and even more local ones that tend to do municipal ordinances and various things. And the number of laws, just the sheer number of laws that currently are on the books as a result of those bodies' existence and their tendency towards acting in a more or less permanent nature, which, by the way, certainly the U.S. federal legislative body wasn't really supposed to be, right? But the number of laws that have been generated is staggering. And to make that worse, the size of the various laws that have been generated is even more staggering. Literally, you've got laws, you've got sets of rules, whatever you want to say, that are thousands and thousands of pages of laws. They're not just thousands of words, they're not just thousands of lines, they're literally thousands of pages of regulatory activity of one kind or another. And this is occurring more on the federal level than any other. And then there's another thing that happens, and this happens in the legal community or society at large, and it is what is referred to as precedent law. And it is where people use the existence of decisions that have been made and try to compare them to things with which they are dealing, and because there is precedent to how those things are handled, that precedent is used to decide whether, where a person stands, where a given regulation, set of rules, whatever applies. Okay, this is precedent law. And the problem with precedent law is that it's based on a huge amount of precedent by this point, right? I don't know. I personally don't know what you do about this, with a couple of exceptions that I would give that I don't think are going to happen, even though they're what need to happen. First of all, I think that a federal legislative body that meets the year round is a ridiculous idea. It is absolute foolishness. The federal legislative authority in the United States just was not intended to have the kind of power that currently exists in that body today. Secondly, I think that clear boundaries need to be set on what those folks should be legislating. It should be understood that the majority of legislation should be occurring on the state level or below. And this is very obvious in the statements of the founders. I'd love to see some sort of legislative reform that actually goes and looks carefully at laws and strikes down a bunch of stuff that doesn't need to exist. In terms of precedent, I'm not sure what you do, because I can tell you this, there are literally instances. So one instance that comes to mind is when Dinesh D'Souza talks about his conviction for campaign finance misaction, right, of one kind or another. The problem is Dinesh was pardoned for what he did, but the precedent is still in place. And that means that somebody else is likely to be gigged by that same precedent over the course of time. And I'll tell you right now, I'm not assuming that Dinesh is anything like alone in that, right? And so one thing that we have a problem with is well, obviously part of the problem is what we need is a judiciary who can say, look, this person may have been even found guilty under that, but the truth of the matter is, if you look at the precedent, that precedent doesn't stand the holds water test. And secondly, that people thought that what this person did did not warrant the actions that were taken against him. And that's, like I say, it doesn't matter if it's campaign finance issues or if it's murder, if it's robbery, whatever it happens to be, right? With regard to the law, one thing that you need to understand is that the people who wrote the Bill of Rights, even the people who wrote the Bill of Rights into the Constitution, had serious reservations as to whether or not that was a reasonable thing to do. And certainly there were others who unquestionably had issues with that, right? And stated them quite loudly and, in very strong terms. And you know what one of the strongest arguments against the Bill of Rights is? It's what's happening now. It is that people are going to say, well, this is all you can count on for rights. And that's not what was intended to happen. This was intended to be a baseline of what you should be allowed to have. It wasn't intended to be a comprehensive list. It was intended to be, this is where we start. Okay? And this is why people had problems with it, because they thought very likely that people who had the ability to do so would make it a standard assumption that it isn't a baseline, but that's all you get. All right. And so this is one of the problems with laws. But another problem with laws is literally, I'm sure that you would find that there are conflicting laws on the books, and where you can say, there's a term abrogation, where you can say that newer law abrogates older law. The fact is, overturning older law by passing newer law without obsoleting the older law is wrong. It should be made clear that what you're doing is an abrogation in that instance. It should be made clear that the older law doesn't stand. And part of the reason for that is because, like it or not, there are people out there who may very well use the older law in order to serve their purposes, as well as using the newer law when they think that that's an appropriate or acceptable thing to do. I don't know what we do at this point, and I'm kind of throwing this out there as a question with the idea that maybe people can think about this and come up with some solutions, and maybe that you can comment and tell me what you think we ought to do. I know this. I wouldn't even want to guess at how many laws. If we don't have 10,000 laws on the books at any given, any given person is beholden to, I'd be absolutely astounded, and that's ridiculous. That is outlandish. That sort of thing should never have been allowed to happen. And by the way, again, is this happening only in the United States? No, I'm pretty much afraid that it's happening everywhere to some degree. Maybe other countries have found ways to grab this tiger by the tail in such a way that they're actually able to control it and make it so that you don't have this excessive number of ordinances that people, edicts that people have to follow. But I'm here to tell you that in the United States, the number of such laws is insane. The number of laws that probably affect me on a daily basis, many of which I'm not even aware of, it's just crazy. So this, to me, is something that I think we really, really need to target. And I like I said, I can mention some things we might do, like tell people you can't have a year-round legislative session for federal legislators, and telling people on the federal level, you can't write law on this or that because it's unconstitutional or whatever. But one of the problems that we have right now is that there's literally nobody in my mind talking about this. There are a couple people who are kind of looking at it in some odd ways. There was one of the ladies who recently got elected to Congress who was doing things like calling recesses in order to get people to think about the crazy laws that they were passing. And that's maybe one of the things that you can do to combat that. But I sort of question whether or not that's going to work as an overall thing, particularly because there's so many laws in the background that need to be dealt with. All right, I'm basically out of time today, so I'm trying to keep myself to that 10-minute window as much as I'm able to do so, and I'm already over it today. So yet again, we're having wonderful weather here. It's a little bit cool. It's starting to be a little rainy today, but it's not horrible. Obviously, it is Thursday, the 11th of March of 2021, which means tomorrow will be Friday, the 12th of March of 2021. Tomorrow, we're going to talk about paying the piper, in which we discuss the idea that when you do various things, particularly from a governmental perspective, somehow you got to pay for them. And the question is, how do you do that? And part of what the question is do you do those things if it's going to mean that you're going to have to pay for them, and you are, right? Okay, so all of this having been said, I hope you're having a good day today. We're pushing very rapidly towards the weekend. I hope things are going well for you, and hopefully we will get a chance to see you again tomorrow. The speaker on this edition of the Daily Summation is Kurt Schubert. This video was recorded on Thursday, the 11th of March of 2021. The Daily Summation is created for Kurt's Religion and Politics. Thanks for watching this edition of the Daily Summation from Kurt's Religion and Politics. I hope you found it entertaining or instructional, or maybe both. If you want to see more from me, you can go to blogs.kpschubert.com. That's blogs.kpschubert.com. I am on Twitter, Parler, and Minds.com. My handle on each of those is @kpschubert. That's @kpschubert. I have a Rumble and a YouTube channel. They are the Kurt's Religion and Politics channels on Rumble and YouTube. I have a Facebook page. The Facebook page is Kurt's Religion and Politics as well. I am on Patreon. If you want to support me, that's one of the better places you can do that. And you will find me at Kurt's Religion and Politics on Patreon. I have a podcast. The podcast is podcasts with an S, .kpschubert.com. That's podcasts.kpschubert.com. I think you should be able to find me with relative ease on Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, and Spotify as well. The best way I find to do that is to look for Kurt's Religion and Politics. You can try to use the Daily Summation. I find that it doesn't work as well as a general rule, but you can always try that. I'm glad to have you aboard today, and hopefully we will see you again tomorrow.